Your money may not be disappearing. Perhaps he's changing what he can do for you. And that's an important difference, because when people talk about economic crisis, they usually think of something big, obvious, and nosy. A bank is collapsing, the stock market is plummeting. An urgent announcement from the government. A headline saying that something went wrong. But often, the most dangerous change begins in a much quieter way. It starts when your grocery bill seems a little heavier. When rent takes up a larger portion of your salary. When the car payment, which previously seemed manageable, starts to feel like a prison. When the credit card stops being a tool and starts becoming an extension of your income. When you look at your savings account and think, I'm saving money, so why do I still feel like I'm falling behind? When you open your retirement account and realize that the number may be there, but the trust isn't. That's the point. The problem isn't just that prices have gone up. The problem is that the invisible rules of money have changed. For a long time, the promise seemed simple. Work, win, save it, avoid bad debt, invest with patience. And, over time, your life should become more stable. But for millions of people, mostly ordinary Americans, that promise began to falter, not all at once. Not in a dramatic way, but gradually. The same salary buys less, the same savings offer less protection. The same debt weighs more heavily, the financial market is going up, while real life seems more difficult. And the solutions to each crisis always seem to involve more debt, more liquidity, more money created, more financial engineering. If you want clear explanations about economic risks that many people feel in their wallets, but still can't put into words, follow this channel. The idea here is not to create panic, it's about transforming economic confusion into clarity. Because when you understand what's happening, the fear begins to lose its power. In this video, I want to show you 5 signs that money isn't working the way it used to. Not as a theory, not like a Wall Street class, but as something that appears in your everyday life. In your salary, at your home, in your debt, in your savings account, in your future. And before we get to the first signal, we need to clarify a central idea. Money is not just paper. It's not just a number on the bank screen. It's not just the balance that appears in the app. Money is a promise. It's the promise that your work today will be able to buy you something tomorrow. It's the promise that if you forego consumption now and save, that sacrifice will be worthwhile in the future. It is the promise that time, effort, and discipline can be converted into security. But when that promise weakens, people don't notice immediately. First, they just sense that something is wrong. They don't say, the monetary system is changing. They say, why do I earn more and yet feel more squeezed? They don't say, my purchasing power is being eroded. They say, it seems like my money doesn't last until the end of the month anymore. They don't say, my financial behavior is being affected by macroeconomic conditions. They say, maybe I'm just not organizing myself properly. And that's where the confusion begins. Because the deepest crisis doesn't begin when people ask, how much money do I have? It starts when they ask, what can this money still buy? That's the first sign. Your salary goes up, but your life gets shorter. At first glance, earning more seems like progress. If a person goes from earning $60,000 a year to $66,000 a year, the number has increased. On screen, it looks like a victory. In terms of resume, it looks like progress. In conversations with others, it seems that life has improved. But money shouldn't be measured solely by numbers. He should be judged by what he can afford to buy, if the rent goes up faster, if the insurance gets more expensive, if the market weighs more, if credit card interest rates increase, if the car payment consumes more income, if taxes, fees, and hidden costs grow along with them. So that increase might not be growth at all. Perhaps it's just damage control. You're earning more dollars, but buying less life. And that's one of the most difficult psychological tricks to spot. In behavioral economics, there is a concept called the money illusion. This happens when people look at the face value of money, but don't immediately realize what has happened to the real purchasing power of that money. In simple terms, you focus on the salary number, not on what it buys. You think, I'm earning more than before. But your body feels something else. It feels like there's less space. Less time off, fewer choices, less future. And when that happens, many people blame themselves. Maybe I'm spending too much. Maybe I need to cut more. Maybe I'm not disciplined enough. Of course, budget matters. There are individual decisions that make a difference. But not all financial hardship stems from a personal failing. Sometimes you're running at the same speed, but the treadmill has become faster. Sometimes you're doing what you were taught to do, but the economic environment around you has changed. Inflation doesn't just increase prices. She is silently rewriting her definition of normal. What once seemed expensive is now commonplace. What once seemed excessive is becoming the norm. What was once considered a difficulty is beginning to be treated as a normal part of adult life. And perhaps that's the most dangerous part. Because when loss happens slowly, people adapt before they realize they've lost something. They lower expectations, they postpone plans. They accept less, they buy worse, they offer more installment plans. They give up on things that once seemed basic. And they call this reality. But perhaps it's not just reality. Perhaps this is the first sign that the money you receive no longer carries the same promise once did. And when money changes its purpose, the first thing that disappears isn't the balance, it's the feeling of being in control. You still receive it. He still pays bills. She still buys food. He still works, but something becomes different. Previously, a salary increase seemed to open up opportunities. Now, often it just prevents you from sinking faster. Previously, a promotion seemed to change her life. Now, she can only keep up with the rising costs of rent, insurance, food, gasoline, energy, mortgage payments, and medical care, and that creates a strange feeling. The person looks at their own income and thinks, I should be doing better. But look at your own life and feel, I'm feeling tighter. This conflict between numbers and experience is precisely where many people get lost, because the system displays the number, but life shows you what purchasing power is. And purchasing power is what really matters. A higher salary, a weaker currency may seem like progress on paper, but in practice it may just be a more elegant form of slow impoverishment. Imagine someone who earned $5,000 a month. After a few years, that person starts earning $5,500. On paper, she's earning more, but if the rent went up, if the health insurance plan went up, if the car loan has become more expensive, if the weekly market increased, if the credit card has become part of the budget, so that extra $500 might already have an owner before it even hits the account. This is the moment when a salary ceases to represent freedom and becomes merely a means of survival. And that's why so many people feel like they're working more to live less. Not because he imagined it, not because she became lazy, not because he lost discipline, but because, in an environment of persistent inflation, high interest rates, and rising essential costs, money requires more effort to provide the same standard of living. And when this happens for long enough, the whole society begins to change its behavior. People are postponing buying a house. They are postponing having children. They postpone getting married. They are postponing changing cars. They postpone taking care of their health. They postpone their vacation. They postpone dreams. Not because they stop wanting those things, but because money, which used to be a bridge between work and the future, is starting to seem like a shorter bridge. You walk, but she doesn't go as far as she used to. That's the first sign. Your salary may increase, but if your freedom shrinks, money no longer works the same way. Now comes the second sign. Saving money no longer seems as safe as it once did. For decades, the rules seemed simple. Work, economize, avoid debt. Keep it for emergencies. Be responsible. This rule still applies. No one is saying that saving money doesn't matter. Having savings remains one of the most important foundations of financial life. The problem is something else. The problem is that, in certain economic environments, idle money ceases to seem merely safe and begins to seem vulnerable. Because there is a difference between not losing dollars and not losing power. You can have the same amount in the account. But if everything around you has become more expensive, that amount of money buys less. And this hurts especially those who tried to do everything right. The person cut expenses. He saved a little every month. He avoided unnecessary purchases. He tried to be prudent. But after some time, you look at the money you've saved and realize it doesn't offer the same protection it once did. It's a profoundly frustrating feeling. Because the person wasn't being irresponsible, she was disciplined. But her discipline was being measured by a coin that changed hands beneath her feet. Think of a bucket, you put water in it every month. With patience, with sacrifice, with consistency, but the bucket has a small hole. At first, it's almost impossible to notice. The water is still there, the effort still seems to be working. But over time, you notice that the level isn't rising as it should. Then you add more water. Work harder, cut more, save more. And even then, the bucket doesn't fill up. This hole represents the loss of purchasing power. It's quiet, it's slow, and that's precisely why it's dangerous. Because nobody cares when you say, your money has lost some of its ability to protect your future. You just realize that the reserve that seems sufficient for 6 months might now only cover 4. The money that once seemed sufficient for a down payment on a house now seems out of reach again. The amount you set aside for security now seems small in a more expensive world. That's the shock. Saving money remains important. But saving money in a system where the value of money changes requires greater awareness. Because security isn't just about having numbers in an account. Security is knowing what these numbers can handle. The bill kept growing, the future seemed more secure. But in today's world, the line doesn't seem so straight. It feels like a race against forces that most people don't control. Inflation, fees, rent, health, safe, public debt, housing costs, cost of education, the cost of aging. And when all of this comes together, the question changes. The question is no longer simply, how much did I manage to save? And it becomes, how much longer can this money protect me? That's a very different question, because $100 is still $100. That the life that $100 can buy changes. $1,000 is still $1,000. That the emergency at $1,000 solves changes. $10,000 is still $10,000. That the security that $10,000 represents changes. And when this understanding sinks in, people's financial behavior changes along with it. Some people become more anxious, others are starting to take more risks in an attempt to compensate for the loss. Others give up on planning because they feel that the plan never reaches the real world. And others simply live with constant tension, as if they were always one unexpected step away from losing their balance. This is the point where the economy stops being just about numbers, she turns to psychology. Because when savings no longer seem like sufficient protection, the mind begins to search for a way out. Some are looking for extra income, some seek investments that promise protection. Some buy assets, some people buy gold, some people buy crypto. Some enter the market without fully understanding the risk. And this doesn't happen because everyone became greedy. This is happening because many people have started to feel that staying still has also become a form of risk. This is a huge change. For a long time, the risk seemed to lie in investing. Now, for many people, the risk also seems to lie in simply hoarding. And when a society reaches that point, something profound has changed in the relationship between work, savings, and the future. But there is still a third sign, and perhaps that's what weighs most heavily on us in our daily lives. Debt has become the real price of almost everything. Today, the advertised price rarely tells the whole story. The price of a house is not just the value of the house itself. It's the value of the house, plus the interest rate, plus the loan term, plus insurance, plus taxes, plus the uncertainty about your income over the next 30 years. The price of a car is not just the value at the dealership. It's the car's value, plus the financing, plus the interest rate, plus the insurance, plus maintenance, plus fuel, plus the risk of being stuck with a payment that seems small at first. The price of college isn't just the tuition fees. It's the debt, plus the interest, plus the time that debt will accompany you throughout your adult life. In other words, the real price isn't just the number on the tag. The actual price is the number on the tag plus the cost of carrying that number over time. And this is where interest rates enter everyday life. Not as a central bank concept, not as a financial headline, but like a silent force that changes the magnitude of your choices. When interest rates are low, debt seems lighter. The house seems more accessible, the car seems to fit within the budget. The deal seems easier to finance, the card seems less threatening. But when interest rates rise, the same object becomes heavier. The house is the same, the car is the same. The diploma is the same, the debt may even look similar. But the monthly weight changes. Debt is like gravity. When rates are low, you hardly notice them. When the rates go up, that same weight starts pulling your body down. And for an average family, this doesn't appear as an economic theory. It appears as a closed door. The house didn't just become expensive. The monthly payment became a wall. The car didn't just become expensive. The funding has become a leash. The card wasn't just a nuisance. Interest has turned small, old purchases into a snowball effect of present-day debt. And when debt becomes the necessary path to access almost everything, life begins to seem less like a construction and more like a permanent negotiation with the future. You don't just buy the gift. You're committing months, years, decades. And the more expensive money becomes, the more expensive it is to make mistakes. Because if income doesn't keep pace with the cost of debt, a small emergency can turn into a major crisis, a car repair, a medical expense, a rental exchange, a temporary loss of income, an increase in insurance, an accumulated bill on the card. None of this needs to be catastrophic on its own. But in an already tight life, any extra weight can throw the balance off. That is why modern debt should not be viewed merely as borrowed money. It should be seen as a promise for your future. When you take on debt, you are saying, I believe my future income will be enough to pay for this. But what if the future turns out to be more expensive than you imagined? What if interest rates go up? What if your income doesn't grow? What if essential costs continue to rise? What if the job market changes? What if the economy appears strong in the headlines, but fragile within households? That's the problem. Debt was sold as access. Access to the house, car access. Access to education, access to consumption. Access to a better life, but when the cost of money rises, this access begins to turn into dependence. And financial dependence changes human behavior. People stop choosing freely and start choosing out of fear. Fear of losing my job, fear of missing a payment, fear of not being able to refinance, fear of seeing the rate go up, fear of discovering that the life that seemed accessible was only accessible because credit was cheap. This is the third sign. Debt becomes the true price of things. And when that happens, the number on the label ceases to be the most important part. What really matters is how much of your future that purchase will capture. If this explanation is putting into words something you felt for years, please like this video so more people can find it. And he comments with a simple phrase, I feel it. Because many people feel it, but still don't know how to explain it. Now let's move on to the fourth sign. Markets may appear healthy while families appear ill. This is one of the most confusing points for the general public. You turn on the television or open a news program and see. The market went up. The index hit a record high. The stocks recovered. The economy has shown resilience. And naturally, many people think, then things must be fine. But this is one of the biggest confusions of modern economic life. The market is not the entire economy. The market is, to a large extent, a scoreboard for those who own assets. Actions, real estate, companies, titles, participation, properties. If you own assets, certain types of inflation can even make you feel wealthier. The price of your house is going up. The value of your portfolio increases. The nominal value of your investments increases. But if you live mainly on a salary, inflation manifests itself differently. It appears as the most expensive rental, more expensive food, more expensive insurance, higher interest rates, more expensive services. Entrance to the furthest house, financing is less accessible. In other words, the same economy can look different depending on where you are positioned. For those with many assets, an environment of abundant money can inflate their net worth. For those who depend on a salary, the same environment can reduce purchasing power. This difference creates a huge emotional disconnect. Because the news might say that the market is strong, but the family feels that life is weak. The index could rise, but the credit card too. The stock market could hit a record high. But the rent too. Companies can announce profits, but consumers may be paying for food in installments. And that's not a contradiction, its structure. The financial economy and the domestic economy do not always move at the same pace, sometimes they separate. And when they are separated for long enough, many people begin to feel like they are living in a parallel reality. On one side, optimistic headlines. On the other hand, families are postponing medical treatment, young adults postponing marriage, couples postponing having children, workers postponing retirement, people with jobs, but no time off, people with income, but without security, people with access to credit, but without peace of mind. This is the moment when one phrase becomes essential: the market is not the economy. He is a part of her, an important part, but not for a lifetime. And for the average American, the question isn't just, did the S&P 500 go up? The question is, has my life become more sustainable? Does my income keep up with my expenses? Does my savings still protect me? Does my retirement seem more secure? Has my house become more affordable? Has my debt become lighter? If the answer is no, then perhaps the market rally isn't telling the whole story, because the most common mistake is looking in the wrong place. If the market goes up, many people think the system is healthy. Even if official unemployment seems low, many people believe that families are doing well. If the indicators continue to hold true, many people believe there is no crisis. But a financial crisis doesn't always begin with a sharp drop. Sometimes, it starts with a separation. The separation between aggregate numbers and everyday experience. The separation between asset prices and worker income. The disconnect between the discourse of stability and the feeling of fragility. The separation between those who have assets and those who only have a salary. And this separation changes people's behavior. Those who own assets can feel protected. Those who depend on their job may feel they are losing ground. Those who have already bought a house can expect it to appreciate in value. Those who haven't bought yet can see a door closing. Those with capital can take advantage of interest rates, opportunities, and cycles. Those who rely on credit feel each decision becoming more expensive. This is one of the reasons why so many people say, who benefits from a good economy? This question is not a sign of ignorance, it's perception, because the economy is not experienced in averages. She lives by monthly bills, for rent, at the supermarket. Interest-based interest, insured, in net salary. The balance after everything has been paid. When a person sees the stock market rising but feels their own life shrinking, they are not necessarily wrong. She may be noticing a part of the economy that the mainstream charts don't clearly show. And this is where a point of behavioral economics comes in. People use headlines as mental shortcuts. If the headline says the market went up, the brain interprets it as a sign of improvement. If an index hits a record high, the brain interprets it as a sign of prosperity. But financial indicators don't measure a family's anxiety before paying rent. They don't consider couples to postpone having children because they can't predict the cost of living. They don't measure the young adult who works but can't move out of their parents' house. They don't measure the person who has a job but depends on the card to get through the month. They don't consider the impact on retirees who see their fixed income losing strength in the face of higher medical costs. They don't measure the difference between looking employed and feeling secure. And that's why markets can seem healthy while families feel sick. Not because the markets are fake, but that's because they measure something else. They measure expectations, profits, liquidity, asset value, access to the capital, future narratives. But everyday life measures a different reality. How much is left? How much does it weigh? How scary? How much does it need to be postponed? How much of a future still seems possible? And when these two realities diverge too much, money begins to lose one of its most important functions. The function of translating effort into progress. Because if you work harder, earn more, do more, cut more costs, learn more, try harder, and still feel that the future has become more distant, something in the system is communicating a dangerous message. Effort alone no longer guarantees progress. This is the fourth sign. Markets may appear strong, while families' financial lives become more fragile. And now we come to the fifth sign, perhaps the most important thing. The solution to each problem starts to always look the same. More money, more debt, more liquidity, more refinancing. Further extension of the deadline. More emergency mechanisms, more financial engineering. Whenever a crisis arises, the modern system seems to have a standard response. If there's a shortage of money somewhere, inject liquidity. If an institution is at risk, it creates an emergency facility. If a debt becomes too burdensome, it rolls over. If a payment is due, refinance it. If the market freezes, a new line opens. If the problem is too big to break, it becomes big enough to be rescued. The technical name changes, the packaging changes. The justification changes, but the pattern reappears again and again. A debt problem arises, the solution is another layer of debt. The audience hears that it's temporary. Then the temporary situation becomes normal. And, over time, what began as an emergency measure starts to become part of the system's permanent architecture. Temporary emergency tools have a strange habit of transforming into permanent structures, and that changes everything. Because when each crisis is resolved by pushing the problem forward, the system may appear stable for longer. But this stability comes at a cost: more fragility, more dependency, more distortion, more hidden risk. It's more difficult to get back to normal. And for the average citizen, that seems distant. After all, he doesn't participate in central bank meetings. It does not buy treasury bonds on a large scale. Technical reports are not included. It does not trade swap lines. He doesn't read bank statements. But even so, he lives within the system that these decisions create. He senses when money loses its power. You can tell when credit gets more expensive. You can tell when the house becomes unreachable. You can tell when the financed car becomes too much of a burden. It feels like retirement is becoming less predictable. You can tell when prices go up before payday. You can sense when the solution to one crisis seems to be setting the stage for the next. This is the point that many people take a long time to realize. You don't need to understand all the technical details to feel the consequences. You may never have bought a bond, but he lives in a world where bond interest rates help define the cost of money. You may never have read a Federal Reserve meeting minutes, but he lives in an economy affected by his decisions. You may never have used the word liquidity, but it feels like the system creates money, credit, and redemptions in a way that changes the value of the currency over time. You may never have heard of debt rollover, but he lives in a country where old debts are often paid off with new debts. And that's the part that needs to be clear. The problem is not that there are responses to crises. In extreme situations, governments and central banks need to act. The problem is when emergency response becomes a habit. When real discipline is replaced by procrastination, when productivity is replaced by debt, when genuine growth is mistaken for credit expansion, when stability comes to depend on creating more money to uphold old promises. It remains on the account, it remains on the salary. It continues in the bank's continued in the bank statements. It continues in official speeches, but, little by little, he delivers less. Less security, less freedom, less future, less room for error, less peace of mind for an average family to make plans. That's why these 5 signs shouldn't be seen as separate problems, they are part of the same change. Salary loses meaning when it increases in number, it decreases in power. Savings lose their appeal when they seem safe, but they buy less protection. Debt becomes heavier when interest turns time into an enemy. Markets appear strong while families feel vulnerable. And financial engineering is beginning to replace real discipline. Together, these signs reveal something important. The money isn't being destroyed all at once, it is being changed slowly. Not because of a single event, not because of a single decision, not because of a single crisis, but it's through a sequence of choices, incentives, debts, interest, redemptions, inflation, and adaptations that change the way money works in everyday life. This is what a monetary change looks like to those who don't live on Wall Street. It doesn't come across as an economics lesson. It comes across as a more expensive trip to the supermarket, like a portion that doesn't fit, like a reserve that seems smaller, like a more uncertain retirement, like a house that always seems further away, like a persistent feeling that you're making an effort, but the ground is moving. And if you feel this way, you need to hear something clearly. You're not going crazy, you're not imagining it. You're not automatically bad with money. Of course, personal choices matter, discipline matters, planning matters, But it would be unfair to pretend that all of this is just a matter of cutting back on coffee, canceling subscriptions, or creating spreadsheets. There is a larger layer, a macroeconomic layer, a psychological layer, a financial layer, a system layer. And many people were taught how to manage their own money without ever learning how the environment around that money changes. It's like learning to navigate by only looking at the boat, without looking at the tide. You can have the best boat in the world, but if the tide has turned, your strategy needs to change too. This doesn't mean giving up, that doesn't mean you should panic. It doesn't mean believing that everything will collapse tomorrow. And it also doesn't mean going out and buying any asset just because someone on the internet promised protection. It means only one thing: you need to see the board more clearly. Because when money changes its behavior, the worst position to be in is to be the last to realize it. So, from now on, focus less on the isolated number and more on the real power behind it. Don't just look at salaries, look at real wages. In other words, how much can they buy after inflation is adjusted for? Don't just look at the headline saying that inflation has fallen. Look at the price of essential items: food, rent, energy, safe, health, transport. These are the areas where real life takes place. Don't just look at the market going up. Look at household debt, for late payments on your car, for defaulting on car financing, for people using credit to maintain basic consumption. Don't just look at interest rate cuts or increases. Look at what happens with mortgages, credit cards, business loans, and refinancing costs. Don't just look at the size of the public debt. Look at how much the government pays in interest alone. Because a large debt is already a problem. But a large debt with rising interest rates changes the options for the entire country. Also observe how governments resolve crises. Are they creating real productivity? Are they increasing the economy's capacity? Are they making housing, energy, education, and healthcare more accessible? Or are they simply pushing old debts forward with new layers of debt? This difference matters. Because a healthy economy cannot forever depend on permanent emergencies. And an ordinary family cannot protect itself from a system it does not understand. You don't need to become an economist. You don't need to memorize technical terms. There's no need to predict the next crash. But you need to learn how to ask better questions. Not only that, how much do I earn? But what can my income still buy? Not only that, how much have I saved? But how much longer will this protect me? Not only that, what is the price? But what is the real cost after interest? Not only that, did the market go up? But has people's life become more sustainable? Not only that, has the government resolved the crisis? But did it solve the problem or just postpone it, adding more debt? These questions change the way you view money. And when you change the way you view money, you stop being just someone reacting to the system. You start noticing the signs before they become headline news. This is true financial literacy. It's not about pretending there's a simple answer for everything. It's not about selling fear. It's not about promising perfect protection. It's about understanding that money isn't static. It changes with monetary policy, change with debt, change with interest, change with confidence, change with collective behavior. It changes with the way governments, banks, businesses, and families respond to crises. And when all of this changes at the same time, people's financial lives start to look strange before they officially appear to be in crisis. Perhaps that is exactly what millions of Americans are feeling. Not a one-off catastrophe, but a series of small breaches of the promise of money. The salary still arrives, but it doesn't ease the pain like it used to. The economy still exists, but it doesn't protect like it used to. The credit is still available, but it's more binding than before. The market is still rising, but it doesn't represent everyone. The system still works, but it requires more and more patching to continue functioning. That is the central message. The danger is not that the money will disappear. The danger is that it remains in your account while you buy less and less life. Less time, fewer choices, less security, less future. And when that happens, understanding the system ceases to be a luxury. It becomes a form of defense. If this video helped you put into words something you've been feeling, please leave a like. Comment which of these signs came closest to your reality. And watch the video that's playing on the screen now, because it explains the next piece of this system that many people only realize when they're already paying the bill.